Welcome to an episode of Beyond the Roundup. As I mentioned on Monday, we can't always fit in every story into our weekly roundup, and when that happens, we have an additional episode like today, where we cover additional news articles from trialsitenews.com. And for this episode of Beyond the Roundup, we'll be covering the topic alluded to on Monday, when well-known clinical trial challenges such as delayed startup, subpar recruitment and enrollment, and technology silos have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. The U.S. is among the top 10 countries with the highest COVID-19 deaths per capita and by case count. Certain states have had to deal with natural disasters such as wildfires and hurricanes or civil unrest and mass violence, while also being a COVID-19 hotspot. To address the financial loss hospitals have encountered as a result of COVID, hundreds of hospitals furloughed workers, and many of these have already brought back furloughed employees. These hospitals include regional hospitals, hospital networks, and academic medical centers, or AMCs. Research centers are now operating in the new normal, inclusive of virtual visits, new safety measures, work from home, remote monitoring, and providing a greater access to clinical data. So what strategies did research centers implement to promote financial sustainability given financial pressures and exacerbation of old problems? Well, let's discuss. So amongst the top struggles prior to the pandemic were poor turnaround times during startup, lack of expertise for conducting certain startup analyses, siloed technologies, decentralized processes, and funding research infrastructure. Institutions that struggled with one or more of these issues saw an exacerbation during the pandemic that required focused attention. So beyond the underlying problems that previously existed, rolling COVID-19 hotspots impacted what and how institutions carried out clinical research processes. With mandatory or rolling time off and reallocation of staff to COVID-19 related activities, institutions witnessed further slowing in turnaround times for startup activities and reduced support for non-COVID-19 research. Prioritization of COVID-19 trials contributed to a 57% decrease in overall contract turnaround time for these trials. However, for non-COVID-19 trials, there was a 13% increase in standard timelines. Institutions were previously accustomed to executing contracts within 30 to 60 days. Now sponsors seek a turnaround time within a few days for COVID-19 trials. The new normal in a study startup and study execution imparts an unexpected workforce demand on sites. To address the additional workload placed on research teams due to additional COVID-19 precautions, some institutions are supplementing their teams with temporary staff who can recruit and educate potential trial participants. This strategy allows permanent team members to focus on activities that are in line with their role and expertise instead of reviewing masking, parking, and new safety requirements, which are items not typically covered in study budgets. So to support overextended research teams, especially those with studies that were previously suspended by the pandemic, some institutions are temporarily outsourcing all or parts of the startup process, such as contracts, budget builds, or coverage analysis. This speeds study startup and adds a layer of expertise in areas where sites perhaps struggled previously. Now, this outsourcing strategy is also a way to test quality and establish trust with the vendors. Moreover, for institutions that are financially constrained, outsourcing activities where sponsors cover most of the expense can reduce the financial impact on the institution. So a less common approach is for institutions to outsource across several research activities to easily scale up or down, depending on need. This could involve replacing entire teams or administrative departments when its function has limited value to the institution, and it has become a cost center. In this case, the responsibilities of employees are shifted into areas that add greater value for the institution. While this is a less common approach, it brings significant quality, speed, and value to the institution at a fraction of the cost. Certain outsourcing models pass 90% of cost to the sponsor. Now, another area where institutions have implemented creative solutions is in timely submission of clinical research data. Timely review of clinical data is necessary to determine efficacy and safety of the investigational product. Delays in data entry could snowball when research coordinators are stretched thin or become unavailable. Therefore, certain sponsors are covering outsourcing expenses beyond those negotiated in the budget to ensure timely access to safety data. While this is often done at the outset of a trial, it may be added when a pandemic-related interruptions make it necessary to add mid-study. Now, this strategy requires a change in thinking. At the outset, a research site may unfortunately assume that receiving the help is an indication of personal failure or lack of trust by the sponsor in the site. They may refuse the resource and believe that they can do it on their own, only to accept the help once they were unable to meet new demands on the site. Whereas sponsors primarily invest in the sites that they trust have the study population and have a high potential to succeed in trial execution. Now, while disaster plans cover a multitude of contingencies, and some may include outsourcing certain activities, when is the right time to trigger that help? How do institutions decide when to augment their staff with outside resources? Sponsors might consider providing additional funding mid-study for these resources as an insurance policy on their investment. But research centers also considered proactive solutions as an insurance policy for their own business sustainability beyond the pandemic. With this in mind, research leaders established agreements for ad hoc resources within their departmental budgets for the current pandemic-related needs and as a part of their go-forward strategy. Now, this strategy gave research leaders the ability to utilize their staff's talent on areas that require high expertise instead of distracting them from important obligations, as the new resources is 100% on task instead of splitting time with other responsibilities. And time does matter, whether it is to make a study available to participants, to communicate COVID-19 related amendments, or to update location changes in consent forms across hundreds of trials. A preset contingency plan that includes a budget for unplanned disruptions helps ensure smooth ongoing revenue-generating research activities. So institutions are removing layers of bureaucracy surrounding access to appropriate technology and data, while still ensuring integrity, ethics, and compliance. From securing remote access to electronic health records to implementing electronic regulatory binders, e-consent, clinical trials management systems supported patient portals, and more, the pandemic has served as the catalyst to secure changes faster at some institutions. The inclusion of virtual visits, adapted consent processes, and access to data to appropriately monitor the study are vital, at minimum, when in-person visits are not feasible. The ability to implement technology changes or expand use of the technology, if they already used it, had a significant impact on the ability to continue research activities and continue generating revenue. Now, additionally, the realization that failure to recruit Black and Latino people into clinical trials at the same level as they are affected by the disease could delay progress and potentially approval of a COVID-19 vaccine is concerning. Institutions are questioning their hiring practices and the representation of minorities across the life cycle of research. Do the investigators and research staff include people that look like the patient population they serve? Does the IRB office and its committee members reflect the diversity of the community? Now, ensuring minorities are part of the entire clinical trial process is not only the right thing to do, but also secures financial sustainability in research as sites with high minority enrollment will be sought after by sponsors who seek equity and racial representation across their trials. Sponsors will cover expenses of enrollment assistance beyond the negotiated budget to support a study-specific strategic plan that boosts enrollment. There is no one-size-fits-all solution to increase diversity in clinical trials, as regional and population varies across the U.S., but at a minimum, institutions are evaluating representation across clinical trials and exploring multiple solutions, both internal and external. So, the COVID-19 infection rate is at above 40,000 daily cases in the U.S. at the beginning here in October, and physicians reported that clinical care visits have yet to reach the pre-pandemic level. And so the financial impact of the pandemic on research centers cannot be overstated. Research centers adapted solutions and workarounds to mitigate the local impact of the pandemic to help ensure endurance on their research programs. While some solutions fall outside usual business continuity plans at some sites, research leaders implemented solutions that were formally off the table. Now, one such company offering help in this area is WCG, which is a leading provider of solutions that measurably improve the quality and efficiency of clinical research. It's comprised of two divisions: the industry's first central IRB, WIRB Copernicus IRB, and First Clinical Services Organization. WCG enables biopharmaceutical companies, CROs, and sites to advance the delivery of the treatments and therapies to patients while maintaining the highest standards of human participation protection. According to their promotional materials, WCG delivers solutions and services that stimulate growth, foster compliance, and maximize efficiency for sites, sponsors, and CROs. And that brings this episode to a close. From Trial Site News, I'm Adrian, and this has been a Beyond the Roundup episode. We'll see you next time.